We complain that our adults come for years and just sit, listen, and leave. Why aren't they serving? Well, that's how they were trained. There's nothing magical about graduation that suddenly makes someone feel qualified to serve God. If we spent years training students to be consumers of ministry, we shouldn't be surprised when they continue consuming ministry. Hi, I'm Nathan. Welcome back to Holy Hypocrites and something new. This episode is called Teaching Fish to Breathe, why I think we've been measuring student ministry wrong. Since I was in youth, the big question has been, why are students leaving the church after graduation? Churches, youth leaders, parents, we spent years asking, how do we keep them? How do we get bigger youth groups? How do we get more students through the doors? That's been the game since I was in youth group. I'm a millennial. We've blown through Gen Z. Most of my students are now classified Gen Alpha. Everything about their lives is different, but we generally haven't changed how we reach them. I think those are the wrong starting questions for today. What if we asked first, what kind of disciples are we trying to produce? Think of two youth groups. Youth Group A is at a big church, fancy youth room, 100 to 150 students every week. They come in, they play games, they have food, pastor gives a short message. Students come, sit, listen, and leave. The pastor is celebrated. People ask, how are you doing it? How do you have that many kids? He gets speaking invitations. Other churches start to kind of look sideways at their youth pastor. Youth Group B, maybe 25 to 30 students, smaller church, smaller context, nothing fancy. The youth pastor feels the pressure of comparison, but students are serving on the worship team, on the adult worship team. Students greet on Sunday mornings right next to adults. Students help in the children's ministry with Vacation Bible School. They're helping lead small groups. They're running Bible clubs in their schools. Students belong to the church. They're doing the work of the church, not just the youth group. Fast forward 10 years. Which ministry produced disciple makers? Now, don't hear what I am not saying. This isn't about large or small youth groups. I'd love to see every church reach more students. The question isn't whether you have 30 or 300. The question is what makes a successful youth group. And honestly, I already know which of those I want my kids to grow up in. My kids are still very young, so this isn't about evaluating a certain ministry. It's about asking what kind of adults I want them to be. It's a mission, vision, goals question, way more than a size question. Because my kids are going to hear at home that God can use them, that that's what they were made to do, to serve Him, that He designed them to know Him and make Him known. I don't want serving Jesus to be something that starts when they're 18 or after college or when they feel qualified. I want them to grow up expecting that God will use them right away. And in different ways as they grow, but constantly will use them. Paul tells Timothy to command and teach, to set the believers an example while they are training for godliness. He says, train for godliness, command and teach, and then keep training so that all may see, so that all may be encouraged and motivated or inspired by, not by your perfection, he says, but by your progress. That's the kind of church I want helping my kids. Here's the problem. We have confused, and I say we as the church, I've been a youth pastor for 12 plus years. We as the church have confused attendance with discipleship. We've measured how many came, how big was the event, how fun and loud was the Wednesday night, instead of asking, who is becoming like Christ? Who is serving? Who is making disciples? Who will still be following Jesus at 30? Attendance matters. It is a useful metric. It just isn't the finish line. So this is the crux of what I'm on about. Jesus didn't call disciples to be fish, flopping around in the boat. He called them to be fishers of men. We have so prioritized fish in the boat. We've become obsessed with getting more fish in the boat, keeping the fish in the boat. Now we have boats full of fish, and we're wondering why they're jumping back in the water. Maybe it's because we never taught them how to breathe. We never taught them why they're in the boat. We never handed them a fishing pole. So of course they want to return to their natural habitat, to where they feel comfortable. We've made getting into the boat the goal. instead of becoming fishermen. One of my students years ago became a student leader, learned how to lead a small group discussion, how to read something in the Bible, apply it to her life, and share it with others. She was given opportunities both in and out of the church to lead in worship and at camp and at VBS, to teach and set an example while still in high school. She graduated and went to college primed. She went to church and campus crusade ready, hungry to be used. She already owned that responsibility. That whatever church she landed at, she feels it's part of her job to make disciples in her way with the gifts God gave her. My philosophy, one of my mentors used to say, belief drives behavior. And I've added to that. Belief drives behavior for sure. Behavior leads to experiences that reinforce or tear down one's belief. When students serve, when they share their faith and lead and pray with people and teach younger students, when they watch God use them and they see the fruit of it, when they experience God's faithfulness, that experience strengthens their belief. That obedience, and given the opportunity by their leaders, by the churches and youth groups they're in, giving those opportunities to experience God's faithfulness allows them to reinforce, to strengthen that belief, that foundation. Those beliefs that they are behaving on lead to experiences that strengthen their belief. And the long-term problem. So the question for youth these days is, how do we get more? How do we keep them? The question I hear a lot with adult ministry is, why aren't they serving? Churches grow and they go, well, why don't we have more volunteers? Why aren't those new people jumping in? And we're surprised. We're surprised churches struggle to find volunteers. We're surprised people can attend church for years without participating. Well, many of them spent their teenage years learning that pattern. Fun. So for youth, that's games. For adults, it's usually coffee and donuts. So I come, I have fun or fellowship, and then sit, listen, leave, and repeat. We complain that our adults come for years and just sit, listen, and leave. Why aren't they serving? Well, that's how they were trained. There's nothing magical about graduation that suddenly makes someone feel qualified to serve God. If we spent years training students to be consumers of ministry, we shouldn't be surprised when they continue consuming ministry. Hey, let me pause for just a second and ask you to look down and make sure you are subscribed if you're on YouTube, or following the show if you're listening as a podcast. It helps me know that these are bringing value to someone, and it helps other people find them. So please just glance at that real quick and we'll get back to the show. As adults, another student leader I had through my youth group years ago, he was encouraged to participate, and he eventually got on with the tech team, learned how to run sound, eventually ran sound for our Sunday worship services. He got to run sound for a bunch of other events and was really excited and fulfilled by using his gifts, as any of us are. He went away to college, went to a church, went to the worship team person and said, hey, I have this experience. I would love to help. And they said, how old are you? You're in college. You're a freshman. Thanks, but no thanks. We've got our people. We can't use you. And that was discouraging, and that was frustrating. And he looked for other opportunities to use those gifts. And eventually he was trained by the church to come, sit, listen, and leave. And he left the church for a while, and he struggled for a while before finding his way back, before Christ brought him back. Because serving is part of how we grow, how we mature, how we see our own faith strengthened. I said earlier, not much has changed about youth ministry since my graduation, but the students have changed. The internet, smartphones, social media, being 13 years old is different in 2026. They know more. They put up with less. They have opinions. They have expectations of the world, and they want to be taken seriously. What if students weren't treated like the church of tomorrow? What if we got rid of the phrase next generation? But what if they were part of the church today? So instead of Youth Worship Sunday, once a quarter, Youth Takeover Day, where they emerge from the basement to show everyone what they've learned, to perform ministry for the church, what if students were just on the worship team and we were just used to that? What if students were part of the regular greeter team, shaking hands with visitors side by side, serving every week alongside mature adults, partnered with, learning from, setting an example with mature adults? What if we as a church just got used to that? And by the time they graduated and they moved from the youth room into the sanctuary, they were already used to that. Those expectations had already been set. Imagine the impact for a visiting young person to be greeted by someone their age, to see someone their age, whether on stage doing announcements or singing on the worship team or in the kitchen or setting up chairs or cleaning up after the service, being used by God. Wow, well, if God can use that 13, 14, 15-year-old, maybe he can use me. Better yet, the adults that have been sitting in church for so long. Boy, if God's using them, if they're old enough and qualified to be used by God, what am I doing just sitting here? We might change the whole church because we let students be part of the church. And it's not because they're fully mature. I'm not saying throw them to the wolves, throw them in to the deep end. We pair them with experienced adults. We train them, we equip them, we prepare them for that work, and we continue to train them. So we train and we teach and we keep training, almost like Paul told Timothy. What do you know? With training and coaching and accountability, with experienced adults beside them, how many churches would say proudly, how many churches would celebrate, yeah, our youth ministry is a real keeper, and we usually keep her in the basement. I had the chance to teach at camp recently, and one of the things I said that got middle schoolers kind of a little wide-eyed was, your generation is going to lead the church my kids attend. And I take that very, very seriously. I hope that they are allowed to grow. I hope they are allowed to gain experience. I hope they see themselves as part of the church before my generation drops the church in their laps, before my kids show up wanting to be used by God because they've been told at home that that is their job. So what do? We incrementally, as churches, give students responsibility, meaningful responsibility. We pair every student with experienced adults who will train them and love them and pray them through it. We let students lead according to their gifts. If that's teaching, we find opportunities for them to teach, whether that's VBS, whether that's children's ministry, whether that's in small groups. We find if they're in hospitality, if their gifts are in hospitality, caring and serving and compassion, we give them opportunities to be part of those efforts. We celebrate faithfulness more than attendance. We build intentional pathways and we train our people, our adults, to think of them as part of the church. That's the other hard part of this. And well, as we go along in this series, I want to talk to parents and to churches and youth pastors and to students because they all need trained. They all need a mindset shift. And for our adults in church, we have to train them to look at students as part of the church, as the current generation, not something down the road. My goal isn't smaller youth groups or bigger youth groups. My goal is churches full of disciples. Not fish flopping around in the boat, but fishermen. Students who don't just know about Jesus, but they know Jesus. And they're equipped and empowered. They are trained and they are given opportunities to make him known where they're at. Students who don't just attend church, but belong to it. They carry responsibility for the church. With the come, sit, listen, leave routine, we've trained a generation of fans sitting in the stands watching their favorite team and celebrating when their favorite team, which is usually these days the pastors or the extra gifted volunteers who are gifted in certain more visible, more celebrated areas, watch them and then go home and say, boy, we played great. But if somebody asked them to get out of the stands and on the field, they wouldn't be ready for that. Jesus called every believer to make disciples, to be his witnesses, locally, regionally, globally. That wasn't qualified to only if you have these specific gifts at this age with this education level. If you believe, it is on you. You carry that responsibility. If I could summarize everything, it would be this. Disciples are formed through participation. Again, belief drives behavior, which leads to experiences which strengthen belief. It's not a consumer business. That's what I want my kids to know. That's what I want my students to know. From the moment they place their faith in Christ, their purpose isn't just to attend church. My first week here with the youth group where we're at, my first week, I told them our Wednesday night program is designed to be 85% student led. So that means when we have worship, we are training up worship leaders to take my place. I play guitar, I sing, we do worship, but my job is to train up those to take my place. We have what we call Take Five, which is a prayer time at the beginning of every night. 5 minutes of prayer with prayer requests, very personalized. That is designed to be student-led. And yeah, I do the teaching usually, but we have a student leader takeover where student leaders do the teaching. But if you just set that aside, our student leaders are trained to lead small groups. And that takes time and that takes practice. And it takes still adults in the group to hold their hand and to walk them through it. But over the course of years, as those students are trained, as they own those responsibilities, then if you think from the very beginning, our setup and our greeting is done by students, mostly. Our worship is mostly students. The prayer time is led by students. Our social media is heavily leaning towards students. And our small groups eventually are led by students. It's their church just as much as mine. Just as much as their Sunday school teachers or youth pastors, I don't want them growing up waiting for some permission to matter, waiting for some human designed qualification. I want them growing up knowing they are part of Christ's mission. Because one day they'll stop being the youth group. One day they'll be leading a church that my kids walk into. And when that day comes, I don't want them wondering where they fit. I don't want them to come, sit, listen, and leave. I want them to already know. I want them to already belong. And I want the church to look at them as part of the church, as one of us. The conversation is beginning something I've been thinking about for a long time. And over the past few months, have been convinced that we need to rethink how we measure success in student ministry, not by attendance alone, but by whether they are actually participating, whether we are ultimately making disciple makers. Are we dragging fish to flop around in the boat, or are we teaching them to breathe, to stand up, and eventually to fish? I'm starting to organize those thoughts into something I'm calling, and this is a working title, something I'm calling the Student Discipleship Playbook. It's very much a work in progress. I don't want to build it in isolation. In fact, the reason I'm sharing this, the reason I'm going to have more videos coming, I'm going to have blog posts coming, the reason that I want to share this piece by piece is because I want input. I need input from parents. And because parents, it's your responsibility. You're going to stand before God and be held accountable for how you raised your students. So I want to hear from parents. I want to hear from students. Hey, these are the things that we want. These are the things that we are seeing. These are the areas where we think we can contribute our unique experience to the mission of the church. And I want to hear from churches and youth pastors. Here's what's working and not working in our contexts. We're going to talk a lot about the biblical basis. I know there's a popular saying, there's a popular kind of on Instagram, on social media, that youth ministry is not in the Bible. Okay, fair enough. We do need to reach young people, and they are different, so we need to speak to them in different ways. I think there's value in intentional age-specific discipleship, but how can we do that biblically? So we'll talk about that. We'll work through that together. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to shoot me a message. I'd love for you to come along and follow along and contribute, collaborate, be part of this thing. The next episode is going to talk about what it means to be a disciple, how we even define that, and looking towards how we define that for our students way before they graduate and step into quote-unquote adult church. So that's where we're headed. Thank you for watching, listening on YouTube or on the podcast channels. Make sure you're subscribed. It does help get these episodes to people who might find value in them. It helps spread them around. It helps me know that it's worth doing. So you can follow, again, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's also on YouTube at Holy Hypocrites, and it's at nathanpolafsky.substack.com is the blog as well. So I'd love to have you come along with the journey and collaborate as we think through doing the next generation of youth ministry better.